All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jen Haverstock, and I'm the small fruit specialist with Perennia Food and Agriculture. And thank you for joining us today for our Getting Into the Weeds. Today, our topic is food safety success. Are you ready? And this is being sponsored by the Agri-Food Accelerator Program under the CAP Nova Scotia Perennia Canada Partnership. Perennia's mission is to help farmers, fishermen, and food processors be prosperous and profitable. And that is definitely why we are here today, is to help everyone become more prosperous and profitable. We are a multifaceted company, and this workshop is being hosted under the Agriculture Field Services Division. And we are pleased to be highlighting some of the work that our quality and food safety team delivers. In field services, we offer production advice, disease and pest identification and management, and help address emerging and critical industry issues, develop workshops such as this one, and other training, and help producers be environmentally and economically sustainable. I think many people are familiar with our food safety team as well, who help producers and processors meet their food safety goals through training and on-site assessments. And Perennia is also working the product development team has also been doing some really neat things with businesses in Nova Scotia, assisting them in creating new products, fine-tuning processes, improving shelf life. There's also the Agri-Food Accelerator Program, as I mentioned, which is designed for current and aspiring agri-food and beverage businesses in Nova Scotia, and they support commercialization and access to new markets, which our speakers today will be talking about as well. And our speakers today are Elaine Grant and Shelley Macdonald. Elaine works with clients on food safety and quality plan development, implementation, and overall process and production efficiencies. She has assisted many primary producers, which probably several of you are familiar with her already, to successfully obtain and maintain global food safety initiative certification, as well as assisting others in achieving third-party certification such as FSQS, GMP, etc. Shelley Macdonald is our second speaker for today, and she works with clients, assisting and coaching them with development and implementation of HACCP-based food safety systems, regulatory, and GFSI. She has over 11 years of experience in the food industry, having worked with natural health products, meat, poultry, storage facilities, full service distribution, seafood, and she's working right now to deliver as our lead trainer, in-house custom food safety training programs. And again, they are experts in their field, and so I'm pleased to have them joining us today. So I'm going to ask them if they want to share their screen now.
Sure, Jen. Can you see the screen, Jen?
Yes, I can.
Great. Hi, everyone. This is Shelley here. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us to discuss safe food for Canadian regulations, specifically for the fresh fruit and vegetable sector. This is a basic overview of the fresh fruit and vegetable requirements. As the requirements are very dependent on the activities you do, as well as your gross income of your farm, you are responsible to review the CFIA website to determine which parts pertain to your operation. I'm going to turn this over to
Hi, everyone. So we've been getting some frequently asked questions, so we thought we'd address those today. Here they are outlined on the slide. Why were the CFIA regulations updated? How does it affect Nova Scotia produce growers? How do I get started? Where can I find fresh fruit and vegetable requirements? How can I reopen the door to retail? Does Canada GAP meet the safe food for Canadian regulations? Is help available?
So some of you may be wondering why the change to the previous acts and regulations. Basically, Canada wanted to be in line with the US. So in 2011, the US rolled out what we know of FSMA, which is the Food Safety Modernization Act. CFIA wanted a single food approach using one set of regulations. So before, some companies needed to implement more than one act or regulation. For example, those folks who were doing bacon wrapped scallops, they had to implement and meet the requirements for the Meat Inspection Act and regulations, as well as the Fish Inspection Act and regulations, whereas now they only have to meet the Safe Food for Canadian regs. In the past, food fraud, adulteration, and tampering were not as common as they are now. So there's a new focus on market fairness. So what is with the Safe Food for Canadian regulations? As of January 15th, 2019, the SFCR licensing requirement for fresh fruit and vegetables came into force. So it all depends on the activities the business is doing. For example, if you import, export, or trade interprovincial, where you are the last one manufacturing, processing, treating, or grading the product, you should already have a license and a traceability program. The Safe Food for Canadian Act consolidated 14 acts. So previously there were 11 Canada Agricultural Products Acts, the Consumer Packaging and Labeling Act, the Meat Inspection Act, and the Fish Inspection Act. And now we have one, the Safe Food for Canadians. The SFCR also incorporates the Canadian Grade Compendium and the Canadian Standards of Identity. So for cauliflower, there's Canada #1 and #2. So there are some fruits that have grades like apples, blueberries, pears, strawberries, and then vegetables as well. Cabbages, carrots, sweet corn, cauliflower, and celery. So the scope of the Safe Food for Canadian regulations is it's food for human consumption only. And the regulations generally apply to businesses that import food, prepare food for export, prepare food for interprovincial trade, but there are also some requirements, so labeling and traceability requirements that may apply to your business if you prepare your food for intra-provincial trade. And I will turn it back over to Elaine.
So we'll go over some definitions that you're going to hear us refer to and that are in the Safe Food for Canadian regulations, just so you're familiar. Some you're going to probably know and others you may not have heard of before. For intra-provincial trade, that means you're selling within your home province. Interprovincial means selling across the provincial borders. Export means selling outside of Canada. Import means bringing in ingredients or components from other countries. A license is your permit with permissions. Traceability means to effectively trace any kind of non-compliant product from seed to sales, which is your customer. So the next two you probably haven't heard of before unless you've already been researching Safe Food for Canadian regulations. So your preventative controls are actually your policies and procedures and records that are all written. And those control any kind of hazards that are associated when you're harvesting in your production environment. So there's your good agricultural practices, your pest control, sanitation, equipment maintenance and hygiene and programs like that. You're already doing them, but you may not have them written down. The next one is your preventative control plan, and this might be fairly new to a lot of you. It's your HACCP plan, which includes the food safety measures with referring to your preventative controls listed above, controlling all your hazards. And then it has that added piece of consumer protection, which is grading, labeling, and weighing, if it's applicable to what you grow. So, okay.
So as already mentioned, January 15th, 2019, some of you may have been required to apply for a license. So it's for those folks who import, export, or manufacture, process, treat, grade, label for interprovincial trade. Also, you would have had to have met the traceability requirement as well, depending on the activities happening at your farm or facility. And we are going to walk through some of those activities in a few slides. So January 15th, 2020, that's when the preventive controls, the preventive control plans, and traceability requirements have to be met. These also include the lot code labeling of consumer prepackaged for fresh fruit and vegetables, which we will also get into in a few slides. You do have until January 15th, 2021 to use up existing packaging. And some of you may be wondering, so processing activities, some examples are coring, chopping, cutting, dicing, shredding. And then the treating activities would be fumigation, application of pesticides, insecticides, and fungicides. And preserving activities are the treatment to reduce sprouting and waxing. So it's the activities that you're doing at your farm or facility that determine your requirements. It's not about who you are, it's about what you do at your farm or your facility. So are you growing? Are you harvesting? Are you packing? Are you labeling? Are you doing it in the field or are you doing it at the facility? These are the things you folks have to determine based on the timeline table that we're going to go through, and that's the requirements you have to meet. So once you know what activities are happening at your farm or your facility, then you can go through to determine, do you need a license? Do you require preventive controls? Do you require a preventive control plan or traceability? So getting started, first of all, you have to find out if you require a license. And in order to do that, you have to review the fresh fruit and vegetable timelines.
So we're going to do a poll, and I think Jen's going to bring that up now. So how many of you are growers, harvesters, packers, processors, storage facilities? If you could select that, and we'll share them here in a minute. And do you have a CFA, Safe Food for Canadian Regulations license? Okay, Jen, when you have them ready, if you want to share them with us. All right. It looks. All right, so it looks, I hope you guys can see this. I'm seeing one thing, I'm hoping you guys can see this. How many, it looks like a lot of you are growers, but 69% of you, 41% are harvesters, 34% packers, 10% processors, 31% storages. And it looks like a lot of you probably, well, almost half of you don't have a license currently, and you may not require one. We'll get into that in a little bit.
So we've put a few slides together with some useful resource links for you folks. And after we go through these 2 slides, we're going to start looking at some of these links. So the first link is a link for the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, Safe Food for Canadians, that pertains to fresh fruit and vegetables. The next link is the license activity tool, and then it's the timelines for fresh fruit and vegetables. We've also included the guides on preventive control plans, a guide on the preventive controls and traceability requirements. We've also provided you with a link for the new requirements for businesses in the fresh fruit and vegetable sector and the fact sheet for fresh fruit and veg. You will also have the link for the Canadian Grade Compendium, Volume 2, Fresh Fruit and Vegetables. You will also be given these links at the end of the presentation. They will be emailed to you folks. So we are just going to start looking at a few of these links so you can see what is available to you. Sorry, just bear with me.
No, that's not it.
Okay, can you folks see this? Jen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So this first link we are providing you guys is the food-specific requirements and guidance for fresh fruits and vegetables. So as you scroll down, there are some helpful guidance with regulatory requirements for fresh fruits and vegetables. There's also a video presentation you folks can view. There's a Canadian Grade Compendium for fresh fruit and vegetables, also grade names for imported foods, measures for the net quantity declaration, and food-specific export requirements. So we're just going to go through a few of these links. This next link here is guidance that will help you prepare your preventive control plan. So CFIA does offer these really nice links. They have preventive control plan templates for importers, domestic food businesses, as well as preparing an export certification control program if need be, conducting a hazard analysis, and evidence showing control measures. Elaine had mentioned earlier preventive controls. So those are your good agricultural practices. If you go through this link here, you will see some examples. So preventive controls for the hygienic production of sprouted seeds, the use of chlorinated wash water. They also have a link for traceability requirements. So it walks you through and it gives you some guidance with how to develop and implement a traceability program. I'm just going to go back to the slide for a second, our presentation. So these slides may be pretty small for you folks. So we did say that we were going to walk through the timetable to discuss what requirements you need to meet. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open the link using the CFIA website so that you can see these slides more clearly. So the next 3 slides are the CFIA timetable for fresh fruit and vegetables. Okay, So just bear with me for a second, folks. So we're just going to quickly walk through this. So again, we said it's not about who you are, but it's about what you do at your facility. So you'll see the column at the top there, the row, it says activity, licensing, preventive control plan, preventive controls, and traceability. On the left-hand side, you will see the activity. So for the first one, if you grow or harvest fresh fruit or vegetables for inter-provincial trade, and that's your sole activity, you then go across the timetable to determine which requirements you must meet. So in this case, you do not need a license, but you may need a preventive control plan based on your gross annual sales. You would need preventive controls and traceability. The next one talks about if you package and label fresh fruits and vegetables in the field for inter-provincial trade. It then goes on to whether or not, so if you manufacture, process, treat, preserve, grade, package, or label fresh fruits or vegetables for inter-provincial trade, you will see that January 15th of 2019, you required a license. Again, for the preventive control plan, it all depends on your gross sales. And then the preventive controls need to be implemented by January 15th, 2020. And the traceability was January 15th, 2019. It then talks about conducting inter-provincial trade of fresh fruits or vegetables. So if that's your sole activity, you're not required to have a license, a preventive control plan, or preventive controls, but you are required to have a traceability. So it's really important that you folks review this timetable to determine which of these you may need to meet. You may need to meet all of these requirements, you may need to meet one or two of them, or you may not have to meet any, depending on your activity. It also talks about growing or harvesting fresh fruits or vegetables for export. So is that your sole activity? Or packaging and labeling fresh fruit and vegetables in the field for export?
All right, so the last two items in this table are probably fairly common, where you guys are going to fit into likely the most, depending on your size. Any of the smaller growers would fit into these categories. So if you sell fresh fruits or vegetables to customers at retail, you do need to have traceability. So the retail definition is as follows. So retail would be if you're selling at farm market, or if you are a retailer selling to customers, you would have to have traceability. The next one is manufacture, process, treat, preserve, grade, all of that interprovincially. You do not require a license. You aren't required to have PCP, process controls, or traceability, except if you're selling them at retail, okay? So this is a good example of how you might meet more than one activity, depending on what you're doing here. Oh, and to date, it does mention in here about provincial territorial regulations require you to have a federal license. Currently, Nova Scotia does not require you to have a federal license. However, it is required that your product going to retail needs that traceability. So Shelley, I think, just brought up the slide for the screen share for the Nova Scotia fresh fruit vegetable regulations, which goes into detail about grades and the like. So you should familiarize yourself with this document if you're producing, growing, selling fresh fruits and vegetables in Nova Scotia, especially if that's your sole activity. So we forgot to mention too, there's a little chat button on here on your Zoom screen there that if you want to ask a question, we're going to answer questions at the end. as long as time will permit. If we run out of time, we'll definitely compile all the questions and answers, and we're going to send everything out to everybody after the webinar.
Okay, I'm going to go back in and share the presentation. So when is a license required? If you process, treat, or preserve fresh fruits or vegetables for export or inter-provincial trade, so for example, if you're coring, chopping, dicing, then you are required to have a license. If you are treating and preserving in a facility after harvesting, that requires a license, so that waxing and the treating. Package and label fresh fruit and vegetables in the field for export. Again, a license is required. Package and label fresh fruit and vegetables in the field for inter-provincial trade, where fresh fruits and veg will not be subsequently processed by a license holder. So an example of this is if you ship harvested blueberries for further processing, the harvester, you, will not need the license, but the other province, that processor, will need the license. Another example where a license is required is if you package and label fresh fruit and vegetables in a facility for export or inter-provincial trade. So some examples where no license is required. Activities for export or inter-provincial trade, such as you grow and harvest, you apply agricultural chemicals and pesticides. So before we talked about you're treating and preserving them after harvest in a facility, whereas if you're doing them in the field, you do not require a license. Cull and sort, fumigate, cure, wash with an antimicrobial agent, cool during harvest, rinse to remove organic matter, or trim to remove inedible parts. So like the odor, leaves, stems, tops, husks.
So curing refers to garlic and onions. So normally they're cured at a temperature and relative humidity for a few weeks until the necks are dry and tight. That's what curing, that's a good example of curing. Antimicrobial could be the application of hydrogen peroxide to microgreens. So it's just something to consider. You have to really know what the activities you're doing and what you actually require.
So no license required. This is another example. Package and label your fresh fruit and vegetables in the field for inter-provincial trade, where subsequent manufacturing, processing, treatment, preserving, or grading will be done by a license holder. So again, we're going to go back to that blueberry example. So if you ship that harvested blueberries for further processing, you, the harvester, will not need the license, but the processor, the other province, will need the license.
So we're going to get into, just to stress the definition of retail again. So retail means you sell directly to a consumer. So that's grocery store, farm market. If you're at that farm market stand, you're going to need to take these considerations into effect. Consumer prepackaged foods are considered food that's packaged in market-ready packaging. Or it's, you know, if you're selling pumpkins in a bin to Sobeys, that's your market-ready packaging, even though that's your harvest bin. So it's really the activity you really have to understand. So the market-ready packaging, the fresh fruit and vegetable packaging that's purchased by the consumer, that's your clam shells and your fiber board and your wooden boxes, flat or harvest bin. They require a lot code, which we're going to get into a definition in a minute about that. Name of your principal place of business and the common name. Oh, I went the wrong way. Yeah. Technology is great when it works. All right. So the next example, and I think we had a question on this submitted, prepackaged labeling requirements. Those prepackaged items interprovincially import or exporting. sold to an individual or an organization for further manufacturing or food service. So for food service, you could think of restaurants. I'm sure a few of you guys are selling to the restaurant industry, and they can be repackaged. So these foods are packaged in shipping or other bulk containers. They're sold at levels of trade other than retail. So your fresh fruit and vegetable packaging that includes shipping containers, master containers, they require a lot code or a unique identifier, name of principal place of business, and common name. So your prepackaged food, you really have to remember these definitions. It means any food that is contained in a package that's normally ordinarily sold to or used by or purchased by a person. That's the official CFIA definition. So we're going to do another poll. I think Jen's going to bring that up. I hope Jen's going to bring it up. Might take a minute here.
It is going now, Elaine.
Okay, sorry. I can't see it, so sorry. So we'd like to know if you have a means to trace your product currently. And we've added a couple of selections there. Harvest pack dates recorded only, fresh QC lot code applied in addition to records, or your other option is none. And we'll share those with the group momentarily.
All right, I'll give everyone just a few more seconds here and then I'll close the poll. Can you see the results, Elaine?
No, I can't see anything. Oh, I had to click polls. This is kind of new to me, I guess. All right, so it looks like about 36% of you record your harvest and pack dates. The other 32% of you use fresh QC or lot code applied in addition to records. And it looks like about half of you have no lot code traceability right now. All right. So you're going to have to really pay attention to the next few slides, I guess, to make sure we can clarify things for you. So the whole reason we need traceability is to effectively identify a product should an issue arise. I know several retailers have to deal with recalls on a daily basis, sometimes or even 10 a day. So this is why this is really crucial to help retrieve product that may have an issue. So you want to be able to effectively retrieve a specific lot code. Your exceptions for this are as follows: fresh fruit and vegetables packaged in a wrapper or combining band less than 13 millimeters in width. Fresh fruits and vegetables packaged in a protective wrapper or a protective bag that is clear and transparent, on which no information is shown other than price, barcode, number code, environment statement, or product treatment symbol. So to implement traceability, if you're selling at farm gate or farm market, you could write down the harvest dates you're taking to the market and its quantities, as well as any product you do not sell and where it goes. You're really going to have to start keeping a log. It doesn't matter how you do it, as long as it's written down somewhere. So we'll get into a lot code definition we found on the Safe Food Canadian regulation website. So the term lot code isn't specifically defined, but there is a definition listed on the website. It refers to a code that can be used to identify a lot that was manufactured, prepared, produced, stored, graded, packaged, or labeled under the same conditions. So it can be numeric or alphabetic or alphanumeric. Some examples they shared on the CFIA website are production date, best before date, establishment number, Safe Food Canadian's license number, and fresh fruit and vegetables can actually also have the harvest date on there, or grower identification number, GPS coordinates, growing region such as province, but you can't put product of Canada on there. They want to be able to trace it to where the location is, specifically in Canada, or any other code. So they really do give you the flexibility to apply what works for your operation, as long as they can track it back to you. All right, so some examples of maintaining traceability are, you can use a logbook. We've seen Excel spreadsheets work, invoices, receipts on when you ship stuff, you just write the lot code number and the quantity down. Some people write it on a calendar. I mean, it doesn't matter as long as you write it down, basically. Some people have the Fresh QC systems, or the Path is another one that was produced. It's actually came from PEI. They use it in potatoes. And I think a few people are using it locally here as well. And that's an electronic system to do your traceability. I mean, it doesn't matter as long as you need to record those harvest dates so they can trace it back to you and that you can trace it back to the field. So the main thing to really remember is whatever lot code you do pick, you know, if you decide just to put your name on it or your business name, or just a lot code for the week, the more you can narrow it down. If you do have an issue, the less cost it's going to be to you if you have a recall. But you have to start somewhere is what you need to do. Just start anywheres and start implementing some form of traceability, and then you can refine it as time goes on.
So what you folks should expect when CFIA starts showing up at your firm. Basically what happens is they're coming to review your written program. So your preventive control plan or the preventive controls that you have in place. The on-site inspection will be the license scope. So what is that activity happening at your farm or facility? Are you growing, harvesting, packaging? That's what the inspection will be based on. They will also give you results. So some of you may end up having corrective action requests that you may have to do. So let's say your traceability isn't quite what they would expect from you, then you would have to make sure you are developing and implementing a traceability program that meets the Safe Food for Canadian requirements. And it's really in your best interest to conduct your self-assessment. I'm going to pull that up. So CFIA offers a self-assessment gap assessment tool, and it is a nice tool. And you folks can go through it and determine whether or not you are currently meeting preventive controls, or if you have gaps at your facility that need to be filled. So Jen, I'm just going to go and share that other screen. Okay, can you see that, Jen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so this is available on the CFIA website. And again, you folks will be given all of these links. The first one, so these are those preventive controls we talked about. So your good agricultural practices. This one here is for sanitation. So it's the establishment and any conveyances or equipment used in it are clean and in a sanitary condition. So basically you're just going through this assessment and you're going to determine whether or not you already adequately address this. If you do, you check yes, and then you give your justification. Yes, you have a sanitation program at your facility. For the pest control, you already have a contracted pest control, or you're doing your own pest control at your farm or your facility. And it just goes down through the list. So you can see there's conveyances and equipment used at the establishment, conveyances and equipment for waste, land and location, the interior of your facility. So this is a great tool just to help you identify whether or not there are gaps in your current program, or if you are in fact meeting the requirements already. I'm just going to go back to our slide.
So your retailer may be asking for audits or certification, or you may have recently found that the door has been closed currently until you meet some form of requirement. So it's really up to you to find out from the retailer and ask those questions. It's your responsibility. What do you need from me in order to supply you? So things you can do in the meantime while you're waiting for that answer is to meet the Safe Food for Canadian requirements, or use that self-assessment to ensure that you're meeting those requirements. Determine what you need to be compliant, walk through your timeline to see where you're at and where your farm or facility or operation falls into place. Apply for your license if you need one. Conduct your own self-assessment or gap assessment using that CFIA example we just showed you. Develop and implement any preventative controls. Those are your good agricultural practices that'll control any food safety issues you could incur. Develop and implement a preventative control plan if you need to. And develop it and implement those traceability procedures we just discussed. So in some cases, you may only need a CFA license or proof of a preventive control plan, HACCP plan, to supply your retailer. In some cases, they don't require anything. It really depends on, some actually require global food safety systems like your Canada GAP in order to supply them. So you just need to ask those questions and see what their requirements are. So I think we're going to do another poll. So we'd like to know if you guys are Canada GAP, currently being certified, looking at being certified, or you're not there. We'll give you a few minutes.
All right, the results are up there now, Elaine.
Great, I can see them now. So 35% of you are currently certified. Only about 4% of you are looking at being certified, and the other 61% are not certified. All right. So another common question we've been getting is, Canada GAP going to meet the Safe Food for Canadian requirements? So Canada GAP actually performed an independent study, and they did discover that the program they have meets 99.5% of the Safe Food for Canadian regulations. So the food safety requirement of the Preventative Control Plan. However, you also have to meet those consumer protective requirements we talked about. That's your grade, your standard of identity, and any labeling. So even if you're not considering being audited, you can go into the Canada GAP website and take a look at their manuals and use them as a resource to help guide you through your good agricultural practices and get you started on the road to compliance. We also have resources on our website as well to kind of help you guide you in that direction. And those are in the quality and food safety section of our website. So we also are getting a few questions about, we need some help, but we're not sure where to start. So we're very fortunate for the past few years and continuing into next year. We do have a funding program available to Nova Scotia producers to get assistance for overcoming these food safety obstacles to retail. So the government will cover at least 50% of the work up to $10,000 per year per business. And we'll also be adding resources initiatives like today throughout 2020-21. So if there's a particular tool or resource or information you want to see us deliver or clarify, please let us know. We're doing that planning right now for next year. next fiscal year for us. So I just spoke to some potential resources we do have on our website. We are actually going to, if you do find out through the timeline that you need to do a preventative control plan.
So resources that are available. NSF and Perennia partner, and we are offering Safe Food for Canadian Regulation, Preventive Control, and Traceability. It's public training that's happening at PIC, which is the Perennia Innovation Center here in Truro, and that date is going to be April 17th. So in a couple months. Also on our website, we have, so on the Perennia website, you can find e-learning, food safety fundamentals, and that's 7 courses, and you're able to take those at your own leisure. They're about an hour to 2 hours each course. We also have food safety resources that are available on the Perennia website. There are fact sheets, booklets. There's the Canada Gap training that's coming up in March. It's March 10th and 12th. And then of course we have the Safe for Market booklets as well. If any of you are interested in receiving those booklets, you can email cmcisick@perennia.ca.
So I think we're at the point we can take some questions. We'll be compiling all these Q&A and send them to all participants, as well as any resource links mentioned in the webinar as well.
Okay, I just have one question here right now. For the license to import for SFCR, does this include transplants imported by Nova Scotia growers from, say, Quebec or Ontario?
I don't think it includes plants unless it's something under the plant. That wouldn't be food safety related.
Okay.
I'm just trying to think, if you're importing it through, that's more of interprovincial trade. Importing from another country might be a different story. I think that's more of the plant. Now, if you're bringing in, I don't know, you're doing a pack of vegetables and you needed to bring in something from the States like sweet potatoes and put them in your pack, you would have to follow import requirements there. But as it applies to plants, no, that would be not under this food safety.
Are there any avenues for growers to learn from each other about these practices?
I guess if the growers should really attend any kind of training in person. I think especially any of our food safety training, a lot of processors that mostly attend, some growers attend, they do find they learn off each other. I attend any workshops. If you're looking for workshops, or if you want us to do some things in person or more webinars or share information, I think, attend your grower meetings, your annual meetings as well. I know I learned a lot at the Hort, Nova Scotia Hort workshops that were just on there a few weeks ago. I think that would be your best bet. I have a few questions here that were submitted during the needs assessment too, Jen, I could go over.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. So one of the questions we got were, what areas are the weakest spot in industry that we see? So I would say knowing what to do in general, like all the questions we went over today are definitely something we've been faced with over the last year. And even us, we've attended a lot of the CFIA webinars as well, and getting information from CFIA has been challenging at times, because I think they're trying to figure it out themselves as well. And there's a lot of interesting different commodities out there as well. So what we're attempting to do is to hold these webinars and do put these resources out there to make sure everybody's informed and try and close those gaps. Another question, and some of these might have been answered throughout the webinar as well. So hopefully the person that submitted that they didn't know what prepackaged labeling means knows that you have to do it for the harvest bins, as we mentioned. With the individual cello cauliflowers, yes, you need to have coating on it. But as I mentioned, that lot coating definition definitely gives you the flexibility on what you need to do there. And you do need to label those individual containers. That's what we found it from CFIA, your strawberry boxes and your clamshells and your fiberboard. But in stating that definition of the lot coating definitely gives you some flexibility there. I see a couple more questions coming up here too, Jen.
Yeah, go for it, Elaine. You can just
all right. So what level of packaging does the lot code need to cover? Flat or pallet? All of it. So we did ask that question to CFA because I think most of you definitely label the pallet for sure, because that's how you sell it to Sobeys or retail. Some of you sell a whole flat, so you've been coating the flat. And we did discover after we attended the latest webinar that the boxes do need to be labeled, but in stating that, you might be labeling your flats with a barcode or some form of lot code harvest date on that flat. But on those individual boxes, through that definition of lot code, it looks like you can put your name or your license number or that kind of information on your boxes. So you may get away with a pre-printed sticker, much like you would on a clamshell. I think they really just need to trace if that consumer bought that box of strawberries, what farm that came from. And I think this comes from some issues they had down in the States where cantaloupe came up, but nothing was labeled. And they didn't know where the issues were coming from. So I think that's kind of where this is stemming from. So that definition of the lot code on the CFIA website is really crucial on what you need to meet. But I do recommend, you should be tracking your harvest date and having some form of lot code on the flat you sell to Sobeys or the pallet you sell to Sobeys, but you do need to label those boxes. And the next question I see here is, I'm trying to be a zero waste facility. Okay, so, so some people are using, it depends on your product, I guess, what would work. I guess the question was, I'm trying to be a zero waste facility, therefore I'm trying to sell my product with the use of clamshell bags, etc. What packaging options should I explore to satisfy traceability? So I guess it would depend on where you're selling it as well. If you're selling like a bulk produce and you're, I guess, selling it at a farm market, I would trace your product to the farm market and know what you sold on what day. So you could trace that on a piece of paper or something. If it's going onto a retail location like Avery's, then it should be labeled. Some other packaging options we've seen out there are elastic bands. It really depends on what product you're producing, I guess, in order to see what would work and where you're selling it. And what your retailer wants too as well.
So just to follow up on the packaging, we have one on for cauliflower lot code. Can production location be on the bag? Is that equal to the lot code?
Yes, that would be as long as you can track that somehow, or it can be traced back to you. Yes, production location would be fine. That's the definition of the lot code. It said about GPS coordinates. Oh, and just to clarify, okay, so as a small scale market gardener selling fresh vegetables or fruit direct to customers at a farm market or farm gate, interprovincial only, is there still a need to keep traceability records? Yes, there is. It doesn't matter how you keep those records. It could be in a logbook, it could be on a calendar, like I mentioned. You just need to write it down just in case there's an issue with the product, or you discover after the fact there was an issue with that product. You need to be able to trace where that product went to. Did I sell it at farm gate or did I sell it at the farm market? Okay, I see another. Okay, so will this slide be available to view? Yes, we actually recorded the whole webinar and the links. Yes, everything will be recorded and put on YouTube, so you definitely will have access to this.
You will also have the question and answers and the links as well sent to you.
All right, so mention lot code could identify the farm. Does the lot code have to identify the field, day, and product? So on the individual boxes, if you're not selling them in a flat, then yes. But I think most of you are packing them like 12 to a flat or whatever and selling the flat to Sobeys or a pallet to Sobeys. But you need to, the boxes can't go without any label on them because the customer needs to know where they came from. So with the lot code definition to identify the farm gives you that flexibility in order to be able to possibly pre-print those labels and stick them on. And that's going by that definition that we found on the CFA website. And after we've gotten information from the CFA webinars we attended directly from CFIA. That might allow for a little bit more flexibility, I think, with your traceability. I don't see any other questions. Is there any more questions?
Great, that looks like everything. And I'm just gonna take back the screen here, ladies. Great. Thank you very much to both of you. That was very useful to everyone, I believe, and thank you for entertaining so many questions. And as Elaine mentioned, then this has been recorded today and it will be made available to you. We just have to do a little bit of editing and so on. But as soon as it does go up on our YouTube page, then we'll notify all the participants, but it's also will be accessed through our several blogs and our webpage. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. If you have any additional questions, comments that were not answered during the presentation, then you can either email myself, Rosalie, Shelley, or Elaine. And we'll also be sending out a survey after this is finished. And with the survey, we do ask that you fill it out and comment on how useful you found this and if there's other sessions that you would like us to do in the upcoming months. A few more plugs. On March 5th, then we are going to be hosting an in-person record keeping for financial and food safety success with Rhonda Belafontaine. Some of you may have heard her about a month ago during one of these Getting Into the Weeds sessions, but this will be a live in-person training session, hands-on. And then also in April, we will be doing our probably final installment for the winter season of Getting Into the Weeds, and it will actually be talking about weeds. So watch for those to go out on our blogs and on our web pages. And thank you very much for joining us today. And I hope you're enjoying the sunshine that we're happy to see. And thank you very much, Shelley and Elaine, again.